hear that? You hear that or what?
It's hard to miss.
You hear that or what?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's reassuring.
That's the sound of the best watch on the table. Welcome to another episode of 3 on 3. Now, $1,000 doesn't get you much these days. Maybe a month's rent, maybe half a month's rent in New York City. But what it does get you is a fine timepiece. We're here with Jack Forrester and John Buse, and this is 3 on 3 with watches under $1,000. Mr. Buse.
I brought a watch that I think some of the readers will be pretty familiar with. It's the Hamilton Khaki Field Mechanical. This is an homage to a Vietnam-era military field watch. It's priced about $500. It has a long power reserve of 80 hours with its new souped-up H50 movement. And quite frankly, I think it's the best value of the three watches at this table.
Debatable. Jack, what did you bring?
Well, we'll debate it. Well, I certainly didn't bring the ultimate field-good watch. But I did bring a watch I think readers would be interested in hearing more about. I think it represents a fantastic value. It's a little bit off the radar if you're looking for an under $1,000 timepiece that represents really great value. This is the Tissot Gentleman with the Powermatic 80 Silicium movement, a silicon balance spring, and offering 80 hours of power reserve. I think that it's tremendous bang for the buck, and might actually turn out to be a serious contender against the two watches that you gentlemen brought in.
All fine and well until you consider the toughest watch on the table. This is the Seiko Turtle, otherwise known as the SRP 777. And this is under $1,000, and it's even under $500. And speaking of new watches, this is a new edition of an old favorite, the 6309, 6306. And this watch to me just represents pure adventure. It does what it needs to do, and really doesn't need much of an introduction to our readership. Let's start with the heart of the matter, because what matters most is inside, and that would be the movement of our watches. John, you mentioned the H50 before. Tell me why that is a strong contender.
So the H50 is a movement that Hamilton recently put into the Khaki Field Mechanical. It's basically an upgraded version of the manually wound ETA 2801-2. Now that movement had a power reserve of 42 hours and ran at a pretty conventional rate of 28,800 VPH. With the new H50, the rate comes down a little bit to 21.6, but in exchange you get 80 hours of power reserve. It's not a beautifully finished or a decorated movement, but that doesn't really matter because you can't see it, the back is closed. But this is a very fine hand-wound movement, and I think it's important when you have a hand-wound watch to have a decent power reserve. This more than gets the job done, I think.
Jack.
So the movement inside the Gentleman is the version of the Powermatic 80. So this is an automatic 80-hour power reserve movement, and one of the main selling points is that it has a silicon balance spring. So the thing that you get with just using a silicon balance spring instead of a full suite of silicon components, including the lever and the escape wheel, is that you don't get complete resistance to magnetic fields because you're still using some steel parts, but you do get resistance to disruption of timekeeping because of the presence of magnetic fields. And it's an interesting phenomenon. One of the more pervasive problems that you can run into in modern watchmaking with Niverox type balance springs is that they are self-compensating with respect to temperature. However, magnetic fields can actually throw off the temperature compensation. So it's not so much a question of the watch getting stopped, it's a question of it just running less precisely over time if it's exposed to low-level magnetic fields, which we encounter quite often in daily life. And to me, that plus the power reserve is a nice, significant advantage for the watch, and something I think that gives it a little bit of an edge with respect to long-term rate stability over the other two watches on the table.
You know, it's funny, when I started out writing about watches, people kind of bemoaned silicon components because they would say that it wasn't real watchmaking or that it would lead to the commoditization of watchmaking.
I hated them. I hated silicon components. I was okay with it in Ulysses Nardin Freakin', 2000, 2001, but when they started bleeding into regular watches, I was like, this is silicon.
In some ways, the people who were complaining about it, saying that it would lead to this kind of commoditization, are to some degree right, because we're seeing this technology, this type of watchmaking in
$800 watch. The advent of that really allows us to have sub-$1,000 watches on the table. Mine is a nice, simple, reliable, robust movement. It's the 4R36. It is an upgrade from the 7S26, 7S36 that Seikos of yore used. And this one features hacking and hand winding, which earlier iterations of the 6309, 6306 did not.
And how excited were we as enthusiasts when Seiko finally started deploying hand-windable hacking movements?
That's
in
the
dive
magic
watches.
of this watch. And something about this movement that's interesting, Seiko is entirely vertically integrated, meaning every single thing in this watch is made by Seiko, right down to the lube. That's not something that could be said about your watches, gentlemen.
So here's the thing. To what degree in this day and age is a movement being in-house an actual practical technical advantage? And I think that the answer is, at this level, it's simply not.
I would also just add quickly, what being completely vertically integrated in Japan means being completely vertically integrated in Switzerland are two completely different things. There's an entire infrastructure built around the country in
So it's
Switzerland to
even
support
more
the industry.
impressive that it's vertically integrated in Japan.
No, I'm just saying that it's necessary for if you're Seiko. The suppliers aren't necessarily there.
That's true. You have to
Whereas
build
they're in
out the
abundance
supply
in
chain.
Switzerland.
Right. All right, that's fair. That's fair. I think, to me, on an ideological level, I like knowing that everything came from one place and was assembled in a straight line by the same company. So we've covered the heart and soul of the watch, the movement, but we all know looks do matter. Aesthetics play a part in how we appreciate our watches, undoubtedly. And I think what's cool about this watch is that it is unlike anything else. In fact, there was even a Swiss homage to the Seiko 6309 at one point, and this carries the same visual signature. It's a dial unlike any other. Yes, it is polarizing, sure. I happen to absolutely love it. Incredibly legible, with loads and loads of lumibrate. You look at this thing in the middle of the night, you might go blind.
I have to say, I know we're here to defend our own choices, but I think there's more lume on one pip in that watch than there is in both of our watches put together.
This is an icon. There is nothing else like it, although I will say it is descended loosely from the 6105, the visual design language and so forth. There's a reason why Seiko has such a strong fan base, and I think a lot of that is represented in this watch.
Looking at this watch, I think this is one of the most simple and yet beautiful watch designs, certainly that you can have for less than $1,000, and that was one of the main reasons why I picked it, actually. It all comes down to the mill specs that inspired it. It's a very legible design, it's relatively compact, it's comfortable, it has a somewhat oversized crown, which makes sense because it's hand wound, and then Hamilton has thrown in all these little extras. So there is, as we'd mentioned earlier, the upgraded movement, but there's also this beautiful untreated leather NATO. And when you think about what a leather NATO might cost, if you were to buy it as like an individual product, that can often be over $100. You're getting this on a watch that retails for $525.
It's also faux Tina, which, Jack, you probably have something to say about.
It doesn't bother me on this watch at all.
Yeah, I think
if I'm honest.
it looks good. I mean, if you compare this watch to an original in its current form, the hue of the lume is actually almost perfect.
One of the exciting things about these two watches is that they both have designs that are really driven by necessity. So people weren't making aesthetic decisions per se when they designed these watches. They were designed to work as instruments first and foremost. They were designed to be legible. They were designed to be easy to read under difficult conditions and relatively easy to wear. They were purpose-driven in terms of their design. So when you're designing a dress watch, which I think the Tissot gentleman is, you can make decisions that take the watch maybe a little bit more into the realm of pure design and a little bit away from the realm of functionality. And I think that it's possible to make decisions that do detract from the aesthetics of the watch. And one of the things that I like about this piece is that they have kept things quite simple, quite straightforward. Everything looks really nicely done. We have these beautifully beveled hands, beautifully beveled markers, these very tasteful little lume dots that have a very 1950s, 1960s dress watch feel to them. There's this beautiful little metal surround around the date window. It's really a watch that's free of any extraneous ornamentation, and I think that's part of the charm. You put it on in the morning, head into the office, and by God, if you don't feel like a gentleman.
So let's talk about wearability, which is a very important factor of these watches, and I think it's a huge strength of this watch. And I will say that when I strap this watch on, it does inspire adventure. This case is 44 millimeters wide, but it doesn't necessarily wear that way. Keep in mind, this watch is actually used by scuba divers. It was issued to folks on an Antarctic research expedition. People who are doing things actually wear this watch, so it must be pretty wearable. And that's something I like about it. I like the crown at 4 o'clock. It doesn't dig into the wrist. The bezel is easy to grip. It has 2 rows of these notches. You hear that? You hear that or what?
It's hard to miss.
Did you hear that or what, Jack?
Yeah.
All right.
It's a reassuring.
That's the sound of the best watch on the table.
Oh.
You know?
I think the wearability of this watch was great. It's 38 millimeters in diameter. It's less than 10 millimeters thick. It wore super comfortably on this NATO strap. Now, I've heard some criticism from people that the lugs are perhaps a little too long.
Yeah.
That's a known criticism.
They dig into your wrist a little.
I didn't find that to be the case. However, I have had it on this NATO, so that may have mitigated that issue to some degree. It's 50 meters water resistant, which is good enough for everyday wear. It is small enough at 38 millimeters that it can slide under a shirt sleeve. I think if put on the right strap, this could be dressed up enough that you could wear it with a suit if you wanted to. For someone who wants something that they can wear in pretty much all scenarios, who doesn't have a quote-unquote collection, this is a really good place to start. But as someone who has kind of a bunch of watches, this is one that I want to add.
First of all, just in terms of how it feels physically on the wrist, very comfortable to wear, very easy to wear, doesn't call attention to itself, fits easily under a shirt sleeve, and I think for daily wear to the office, maybe makes a little bit more sense if you have an office that cares about that kind of thing. You know, this is a 100-meter water-resistant watch. There's nothing stopping anyone who wears this watch from putting it on, a NATO strap and banging around with it on the weekends. I would say that not only this watch, but every watch at the table is a watch that can satisfy anyone irrespective of budget, can satisfy anyone irrespective of their level of knowledge of watchmaking. You can buy this watch for its great looks, but then you find out more about it 2 years later, you're happier about having bought it than you were when you bought it. So what you really want in any watch, I think, especially one you're going to wear every day, is you want a watch that's not going to become a source of regret the more you find out about it.
It occurs to me as I look at these watches that they could all fit into a collection and maybe even be a collection of their own.
This could be a 3-watch collection.
This is because you have your very stylish dress watch that also brings in elements of sophisticated watchmaking. You have like a tough as nails tool watch with superior water resistance and great history. And then of course you have a great looking everyday watch.
And I think that's the answer. I think that concludes it. You really can't go wrong with any of these, but the best thing to do is buy all of them.